Live everywhere on netrootsradio.com. David Waldman, Kagro, in the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, March 17th, 2025. Time for another show. Time for St. Patrick's Day. St. Padraig's Day. I don't know. Can we pronounce it? Is that how you pronounce it? I've been seeing the Irish Gaelic spelling bandied about a bit more. And it was a good reminder that, you know, we're supposed to pronounce things. I'm supposed to strive to pronounce things the way they're pronounced by natives. Not that I can actually do it, but you can strive. Striving's fun. Let's all strive together, and we can do that. And happy birthday to my brother, whom I will not identify by name because dangerous times, and it was always my practice not to identify by name various family members, and instead refer to them as production staff, etc., etc. And there are many of them floating around out there, and the one whose birthday it is probably not even listening. But for those of you who are and who may want to convey your wishes or just generally wish out into the universe a happy birthday, St. Patrick's Day, not a bad birthday. Honestly, not Irish, but not a bad birthday. People are out celebrating for your birthday all the time. It always looks good. And you can always find a party on or around your birthday, and you can't beat that. Okay, time for us to dive into a Monday, and it's a Monday without a Greg Dworkin, which is a sad Monday. But no big deal, just a routine appointment today, but, too many of these routine appointments made during show hours, if you ask me, by which I mean one was made during show hours, and now we don't have the benefit of his having, being around to help carry us through the first hour of another confusing show. Lots happening this weekend, the usual weekend chaos from Trump, I guess, although they do a pretty good job keeping him distracted with golf, I must say, and I think it is during the flights home and back, and depending on where you think home is. The flights to Mar-a-Lago, it's usually pretty quiet. The flight down to Mar-a-Lago, he's tired. He just wants to put his feet up and relax. And he plays golf. And then on the way home, to Washington, D.C., he remembers he's the president of the United States and thinks he can do anything he wants to. So he might as well get to it because, why not start making problems for people? That's what I do as president of the United States, he thinks. And so it begins. All right, let's see. You know what? I have to open up all of my relevant pages. I'm a little bit behind in getting everything prepared. I was a little I think I'm getting nervous and frightened about having to set up on Zoom. But since Greg's not calling in today, we don't have to deal with the Zoom thing. But I think just the memory of the trauma of having to deal with Zoom is affecting my preparedness in the mornings. Anyway, lots of other things to open up to, and but normally I would at this point have the social media decks open and all the other various inputs for more information. All right, it didn't take too long, and I had to turn the sound down on a couple of things. I still haven't figured out exactly how to mute all of the things I had muted at one point. But that, and we have had some input from listeners with some tweaks and tricks about how to make it such that Greg can hear the music as a cue for when we're leaving during the breaks, but he's not here to try it with me, so that's okay. It was all work I had to do on my end anyway, and who wanted to do that? Anyway, so over the weekend, let's see, I would say the big opening stories for Monday everybody's talking about would be, Trump, mostly Trump craziness. I guess last night around midnight, he issued his edict deciding that Joe Biden's pardons issued at the last minute at the end of his term are no longer valid because reasons. And he came up with one. And I guess this is something that I think in taking a look at what they were saying, not because I wanted to, validate it or anything, but just sort of rounding things up and in trying to find my information that it reminded me of. Apparently, they've been tossing this around for a little while, and it's been a couple of days of fever pitch stuff in the right wing online world and finally got spat out by Trump. His theory here is that, as he said in his Truth Social post, Sleepy Joe Biden, as he still likes to call him, and whatever, that he was so sleepy that he couldn't even be bothered to sign these pardons himself, and that an auto pen, automatic signature affixing device of some kind, and they have them in the White House, and they're used, and they have a proper usage and whatever, and there's lots to talk about, I guess, with respect to that. But the allegation here is, well, he didn't sign them himself, and pardons are really important. So therefore, it's one of the things he has to sign himself. And because I, am this sort of person, I don't actually have proof of him not signing them. I don't have pictures of somebody using the auto pen. There might even be pictures of Biden signing them himself that we haven't seen yet, because the Biden administration didn't release every photo of everything that he ever signed the way the Trump administration does. They make a much bigger deal out of the publicizing signings, even if we don't really know whether what he's signing is what he says it is, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so the allegation is that it was signed by auto pen, and so therefore is not valid, and therefore something. And in particular, the January 6th committee people who got last-minute pardons just out of an abundance of caution, Liz Cheney, etc., will be in for some real trouble. I don't have handy, I guess somewhere here on social media. I mean, do we want to? I guess I don't want to spend any time like publicizing what dumb thing it was that he had said, but sometimes I guess it's worth hearing his stupid voice saying it. I think you all get the idea, and probably you've already seen the thing. So we'll go with it that way. And he didn't threaten anybody in particular, but he said that, you'll be in for a rough investigation, et cetera, because your pardons aren't valid. Well, all right. Because we often discuss this stuff with people who might even be persuadable, or sometimes people on our own side that get nervous about things, there's some that you might want to unpack, including, as Jim Raffensperger has just sent me here, along with others. I have seen this thing. There is a, let's see, Jim says DOJ, but I think it's only on file at DOJ. I think it's an Office of Legal Counsel, OLC memo that was, this is the same memo. Let me scroll down to the bottom here and let's see whether it's signed. Yeah, here, Office of Legal Counsel. So, it's OLC. That's a White House office, but they very often, in issuing their guidance, that often ends up as DOJ policy. Like, for instance, the policy that says you can't put a sitting president on trial. You can't indict a sitting president, the one that keeps Donald Trump in his chair all the time, right? That is OLC. That's an OLC memo that became DOJ guidance, and I imagine this has undergone pretty much the same process. But it is signed. It's a 2005 OLC memo. So this is George W. Bush's OLC, Office of Legal Counsel. Signed here, this memo, by Howard C. Nielsen, Jr., Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel. So you see that even there, the positions overlap. Somebody who's a Deputy Assistant Attorney General will be a DOJ employee. Where is he working? Office of Legal Counsel. Where's that? White House. Weird hybrid sort of situation, but that's how OLC opinion becomes DOJ policy. And OLC opinion is just that. And these guys aren't judges, and the validity of their conclusions are reviewable by judges, but they do get a tremendous amount of leeway. There's a big presumption that they speak with authority, and they're top men and now women, top people, top men, as they said in Raiders of the Lost Ark, in these positions, usually pretty sharp. And long story short on that one is the 2005 OLC memo says, auto pens have been around for a while, and it's probably fine. Is essentially it. I guess if you really want a long story short, at the very top, they sort of state the question. The president need not personally perform the physical act of affixing his signature to a bill, even a bill that's becoming a law. No, you're a law, even though an auto pen was used on you. Can affix his signature to a bill that he approves and decides to sign in order for the bill to become law. That seems fine. Rather, the president may sign a bill within the meaning of Article 1, Section 7 by directing a subordinate to affix the president's signature to such a bill, for example, by auto pen. July 7th, 2005. So, right, even almost July 4th. So that carries extra weight, legally speaking. It does not, but there you go. Who was Attorney General at the time? I guess we're talking about Alberto Gonzalez. So, that doesn't fill me with any, special belief that this was well done. But what can you do? OLC memo is an OLC memo, and it's a Republican one at that. So the conclusion, all the way down at the bottom of this 30-page plus, let me see. Oh, how many pages is this thing? I can't tell because it begins on page what? Where is this printed? In the files in the Justice Department. It doesn't tell me from where, but it begins on page 97. So, anyway, 30 pages later, according to the PDF, is the signature. And here's the conclusion here. For the foregoing reasons, and we'll skip the foregoing reasons because there's 30 pages of it, we conclude that the president need not personally perform the physical act of affixing his signature to a bill he approves and decides to sign in order for the bill to become law. Rather, the president may sign a bill within the meaning of Article 1, Section 7 by directing a subordinate to affix the president's signature to such a bill, for example, by auto pen. The end. Does it raise questions for those of us who listen to the show? Yeah, sure. Why not? We could see what the foregoing reasons are, but we're not doing that here. You could also say, well, it's lots of discussion about whether or not a bill can become law by affixing a signature by auto pen. Clearly, the decision is that it does, but do we recognize that there might be a differentiation between, well, for one thing, a bill and those things which are not bills, like, for instance, a pardon? Sure. We might also remind ourselves that constitutionally a bill becomes a law without the president's signature after 10 days anyway, unless the Congress has adjourned sine die, the pocket veto. So it's I suppose that could be part of the reasoning too. Well, he didn't affix his signature by hand. He affixed his signature by auto pen. Well, he didn't have to affix his signature at all. It's still law. So what's the difference? Well, okay, you might be able to conclude that one that way. Whereas it may very well. You might argue, for instance, and they may address it in the body of the thing. I haven't read it yet. I'm going to have to. I'm just not going to do it here unless you demand it, but I don't think you should. I can read it off the air, but I'd be interested to see whether they think that it would mean something different if it was a non-bill that wouldn't necessarily become effective minus a physical signature. At any rate, I did see that the memo discusses there having been some precedent for it, and in discussion around the memo later on, in between its issuance in 2005 and now, there was at least one instance in which Barack Obama did in fact sign a bill using an auto pen. Apparently the word is that though the question was raised by the George W. Bush administration, he never actually bothered to try it out and actually sign a bill that way. And as I recall, the Bush administration was rather famous for making, for adding some drama to things and having bill texts flown to him when he was overseas or at the ranch clearing brush or something like that. And I thought that was probably what Trump was doing with his own signature games over the weekend, the CR. Now, I guess that brings us to the next thing, but I thought he was maybe trying to set up something more dramatic and making it look like an emergency thing was being flown to him and he was working weekends by signing it in the weekends. Why did he sign it in the weekend, right? That's one question. What are we even talking about? last Friday when we left off, we were in the run-up to the Senate votes on the continuing resolution, the CR, to keep the government operating. Remember when that was the overarching constitutional issue? Yeah, right, Friday. It's changed since then. But you'll all recall, of course, that funding for the federal government ran out at midnight on, well, I guess the 15th of March. The 11:59 on March 14th was the end of the funding pipeline. As soon as it clicks over to midnight, funding ends and the government ostensibly shuts down at that point. So that was the deadline everyone was racing against, and that's why Democratic senators, part of the reason why Democratic senators felt such great pressure to act. The Senate or the House had passed its bill and left town, and there wasn't going to be an opportunity to hand it back to the House before, with any amendments, before the deadline passed. And so it was considered to be a take it or leave it situation, even though really, honestly, if you had not passed it, a number of things could have been done, including bringing the House back or waiting a week and forcing the House to work again when they came back from recess. But whatever, they didn't want to do it that way, yada, yada, et cetera, et cetera. I guess more to the point, by way of segue from the auto pen thing, well, what would it take in order to avoid government shutdown or avoid hitting that deadline? The House would have to pass it. They did on, Wednesday or something like that. Then the Senate would have to pass it. And unfortunately, they did that, too, on Friday at about, 6 p.m., 6:30, something like that. So hours to spare. How long does it take to get a document like that prepared for signature and down to the president? It can be done fairly quickly. It wasn't a huge bill, but it wasn't a one-pager either. And they have to go through this whole stupid process, put it on the parchment. It's not fast. But anyway, they could have gotten it together and taken it down if they wanted to, put it on the plane with them down to Perva-Lago and let him sign it on the way. Just make sure he does it before midnight. Except, who cares? Because he didn't do it before midnight. He signed it on Saturday. So for all the hoopla about, oh my God, this all has to be done before midnight on Friday, it wasn't. So why doesn't that result in a shutdown? Well, I guess you could say technically it does, but, and this is actually fairly routine, I think. Usually the presidents try to take care of signing the thing. It's not a big deal, right? If it's possible to do it before midnight, they'll do it, because why not? It's not that hard. But it has happened on occasion where the thing isn't passed until 11:50 and they can't get it is it engrossed or enrolled? I think at that point it's enrolled and, put on the parchment and double checked and proofread and things like that, brought over to the president for signature. Well, it doesn't always make it. And in those situations, although sometimes they also will go past midnight, it takes them that long to get the vote done. But they get the vote done at 1 a.m. So we have had situations in the past where technically there's an hour or two, 6 hours of shutdown, something like that. And in advance of something like that, when everything is on track and they think everything, is supposed to work out. They have a deal and they're voting on it. They just have to let the debate time expire, or they voted on it at 11:50 and the president is going to sign it at either 3 a.m. or 7 a.m. the next morning. OPM, Office of Personnel Management, OPM's role in all of this is to tell government employees, what are you doing? Are you shut down? Are you not shut down? Should you come to work? Should you not come to work? They will issue guidance in a situation like that and say, technically midnight is going to come and go without everything done on the CR. But we anticipate the CR being completed up to and including the president's signature, really soon, probably even before work begins on Monday. So the guidance is this: come in like there's no shutdown, and we'll handle the paperwork behind the scenes, and we'll make up for everything. And you probably won't even be putting in any working hours that you should be compensated for during what would normally be a furlough, you probably won't even clock in before the whole thing is fixed. So they issue guidance like that and just go ahead. So they can absolutely have done that. And I don't know that they did. This is a Trump OPM. And who knows whether they even bothered or whether they even know that they're supposed to issue guidance. Somebody who's not fired yet probably remembers that you're supposed to do that. So that by itself is not a big deal. But it is interesting, all the hype over, we have to take this bad deal because it all has to be wrapped up before midnight on Friday. And it really kind of sort of doesn't. But if you were objecting to it, or there was some question about whether or not the thing was going to pass, or for that matter, if the president is a crazy idiot and says, I'm going to veto this CR. I don't even like it. It's so terrible. Even if he's just kidding, he would be directing the OPM. So he could certainly tell them, don't issue the guidance that says go for, or issue guidance that says let's go forward as if there is a shutdown, because I'm not sure. I'm going to make up my mind and toss a coin in 10 days. Why 10 days? Remember, if he doesn't sign it after 10 days, if the Congress isn't adjourned, it becomes law without his signature. So that's how long he would have to pull that prank. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing. I did wonder whether he might be playing games with the signature. I certainly thought that he was going to he had the opportunity to sign it before leaving, or to sign it on the plane on the way down, but I think he wanted it to, he wanted everybody to see that it had been flown to him. I'm so important. They fly me important documents to sign. I don't use the auto pen. I love to sign things, and he does. And I thought he might want to make a big deal of signing it, like at the breakfast table in the club room at the golf course or something like that, and say, important paperwork follows me around wherever I go. I'm not certain how he did it, but it doesn't really matter a great deal. But anyway, it didn't last very long as the center of attention because, like I said, by Sunday night he was claiming to be voiding Biden's pardons. By the way, once again, just this good opportunity to point it out, since he was threatening the January 6th committee people. That would be Adam Kinzinger, I guess, and others. Kinzinger and Liz Cheney in particular. Just wanted to kind of point out that her father, Dick Cheney, one of the chief authors and proponents of the unitary executive theory, under which Donald Trump now claims all sorts of powers, including this one. Though it's not clear that this one has all that much to do with the unitary executive in terms of questioning the validity of an auto pen signature, but declaring it to be void and acting upon it afterwards certainly would be. And anyway, I just thought it was interesting that Dick Cheney, big proponent of the unitary executive theory, probably thought he could control it because he was controlling the executive at the time that he was, became a big proponent of the idea. Only now he doesn't control the executive anymore, and it's eating his daughter's face. So, that's how it goes in the leopards eating people's faces party. I thought that was, interesting and ironic, to say the least. So one other thing about this whole pardon thing. What does it matter, right? Like, okay, there's still judges in this country. Not all of them are, got their heads screwed on right. But there are still plenty. Won't they think, like if, for instance, Donald Trump were to say, now we're going to launch an investigation and we're going to make some people very uncomfortable. Liz Cheney, we're going to rake you over the coals, just like they should be raking forests to prevent forest fires. This sort of threat. What happens? What about the pardons? Who interprets them how? And, well, unfortunately, the sad reality is that all of this falls largely to the Department of Justice. And one, Pam Bondi is the head of the Department of Justice. And two, she takes her directions from the aging dotard Donald Trump. So what's likely to happen? Well, what does a pardon entitle you to, for instance? Normally, in the normal times, what ends up happening, of course, somebody decides they're going to launch an investigation into somebody or bring charges against somebody. Federal charges, and the DOJ at some point says, well, now we got on file here a pardon for this person, so we're going to decline to charge this person. And likely, we're also going to decline to launch this investigation because it's going to be a waste of time, because we're also going to decline to charge them no matter what we find, because pardon. So that's kind of how the pardon operates. But that's not exactly what the pardon entitles you to. That's just sort of the decision. As I understand it, as I saw outlined last night, and I haven't, double, triple checked this thing and read up on it, but it does make a certain amount of procedural sense. What the pardon entitles you to is, if you are charged and you are hauled into court to face trial, you can enter as evidence onto the record the existence of the pardon, and it is essentially an absolute defense at trial. But it's not necessarily something you can flash at the beginning and make people say, I'm not even going to investigate you, I'm not going to convene a grand jury and indict you, and I'm not going to set a trial date. I'm going to do all of that, even though I know that if the judge is, like a normal person and actually follows the law and the Constitution, we'll get all the way to trial and it'll be a big waste of time. And then you'll enter that, and then the judge will say, that's right, case dismissed. Wouldn't it be? I mean, you can absolutely imagine Donald Trump and his administration saying, well, we can make life super uncomfortable for you for a very long time. And during that time, as we drag out this investigation and rake you over the coals and leak the information about it, whether we've found it for real or are making it up about you, leak it to the press and damage your reputation, damage your business, damage your personal life, damage the personal lives of your family members and other associates, cost you millions of dollars in legal fees, etc., and then dismiss the whole thing at the end. Or we could pull a real trick out of our hat and say, at the point where you thought this whole thing was going to be dismissed, it turns out there's a Trump judge in charge, and the Trump judge says, yeah, that's right, the pardons aren't valid.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, what it comes down to then is that, even if he's still completely wrong, Trump and his administration can, make your life hell for quite some time before you're actually able to enter the existence of the pardon on the record, and then you may have to roll the dice. You get a normal judge. A normal judge says, look, we all know that there's a pardon on the record here, but I have to dispense with it this way. There's an indictment, and we have to go to trial. There's no, ordinarily there's, I guess, no opportunity to enter evidence like that prior to trial, though perhaps under these circumstances, this being so ridiculous, a judge might entertain a paper motion well ahead of time for a motion to dismiss, but I guess there has to be something to dismiss first. So you get all the way to, through indictment, and although you may not have to actually schedule a trial date, and I think probably a normal judge would say, well, we know where this is going, so I'm not even going to bother putting a full trial schedule together or requiring the attorneys to come up with a suggested trial schedule. We'll just, if you want to have a hearing about the validity of the pardon, I guess we could sit here and have that, and they would demand that. And even that, I guess if a judge decides to take it seriously, will take a couple of days. But so from the launch of the we intend to ignore this pardon through the investigation, and who knows whether the investigation follows any of the rules or what the investigation is, or even if there is one, or it's just a matter of leaking bad stories about the person to the press over the course of 2 years. I don't know. And then finally putting up some sort of charging document only to yank the rug out from underneath everybody at the last second. Or I guess you draw Eileen Cannon as your trial judge, and she says, that's right, the pardon is invalid, and I'm scheduling a trial date, and you have to go through your trial. I guess you could make an interlocutory appeal about the validity of the pardon, and it would probably work in terms of convincing the Circuit Court of Appeals to consider the thing on an emergency basis. And so maybe you never end up getting to trial. They wouldn't make you go through the trial and then appeal as an error of law the decision not to dismiss the case initially. But the point is, you can make more problems than you should be able to make over something as ridiculous as this, just by insisting that things go forward. And you think you have a pardon. Well, let's test it. And I imagine they might decide to, waste people's time that way, because it might also impoverish them to have to spend so much money on high-priced lawyers. And, of course, at the same time, the lawyers who represent you would then be targeted by executive orders, like we're seeing in the cases of other of the big-time law firms who have represented either January 6th committee members along the way, or Jack Smith and the special counsel's office people who have been attacked by the Trump people along the way. So certainly a lot of pressure being brought to bear, and it's not something you can unfortunately, something you can wave away all that easily in this day and age. All right. So anyway, other things that are going on. Like I said, the CR has passed. It's been an interesting weekend with dueling arguments over how necessary it actually was to go ahead and allow this thing to pass. The mechanism, of course, that was used to allow this thing to pass was, they found Democrats who were willing to vote for cloture on the motion to proceed to the thing. I don't know whether they even had to do a cloture motion. I guess they didn't, because they didn't have time. But I could take a look at the voting, the roll call votes over at congress.gov. I imagine that once they got to cloture on the motion to proceed, I don't know whether they bothered to do a unanimous consent agreement on it, such that if final passage had the 60 votes that they needed, they would therefore waive the cloture on that. I don't think that I saw yesterday a cloture motion on passage of the bill. No, I don't think so. And they didn't even really have to do anything about cloture on the bill either. And they didn't do a painless filibuster on it either, with 54 votes to pass the thing. But at any rate, it did pass. And then there was an exercise in excuse making for it, essentially, as Democratic senators who either voted for cloture or actually voted in favor of the thing, 54-46, who I guess we'd have to look around to see, and I'm sure some of you know offhand which Democrats voted in favor of passage. Lots of, the excuse that was being used was, well, I won't vote for passing it, but I will vote for cloture because I know if we vote for cloture, this thing will have enough votes eventually to pass. And my guess was, didn't Fetterman say he was going to vote for it? No, he voted against it, but he voted for the cloture, I guess. All right, well, let's see. By vote position, we'll just do it that way and look for the D's. There's Angus King. I guess it wasn't even D. It's the I that we're looking for here. So Angus King is the one who sort of crossed the aisle on this. Even as Donald Trump is beating up on Maine and its governor, whatever. He wasn't necessary that he crossed the aisle for that, but he went ahead and did it. 46 nays on the bill itself. What were we looking at? Oh, yeah, right, whether Ron or Rand Paul was a no. And he was, in fact, a no on the bill. So, anyway, competing explanations for why vote yes and what would happen if you voted no and we continued the shutdown. It was very interesting to watch. So, those who voted in support of the bill, or those who were backing up others who made that decision, like, for instance, Sheldon Whitehouse, who was a no on cloture and a no on the bill, nonetheless has said on, was it on Blue Sky or was it on Twitter, and I just happened to see it moved over, I don't know. It's probably in pocket here, but he gave an exposition of why he thought it was important to have voted for the bill, regardless of, or for it to pass, regardless of the general rottenness of it. Here it is. I voted against the horrible MAGA continuing resolution, which he encloses in scare quotes for some reason. A fake and partisan CR, I guess that's why. Loaded up with executive power for Trump. I hated it, but respected colleagues who voted otherwise, and not just to cave in versus stand up. That's sort of oddly stated, but I see what he's trying to get at. And he says, I did a lot of research into how a shutdown might play out, and there was lots to fear, not least that the Trump-Musk vote axis, VOU, Russell vote, axis of MAGA extremists would love a shutdown and want a long one and use it to cruel advantage. What was there to fear? He goes on to explain. In shutdown, executive powers are at their apex, including the power to close whole departments and agencies and divisions, reductions in force, the RIFs as we call them, all their personnel, RIF all their personnel, and make massive cuts of programs and firings of people they deem non-essential. Now, before you get too exercised about it, I want to state a couple of things along the way. Yes, one, of course, much of that was happening when there was already a CR in place. Before midnight on Friday, we were operating under a CR, and the Trump-Musk vote axis was already closing whole departments, agencies, and divisions, riffing their personnel, and making massive cuts of programs and firings of people that they deemed non-essential. But the theory was that, well, I guess the long story short theory on this was, well, if there was no funding in place for them, the operations by which and the decisions made to close departments and furlough all their employees could be disguised as compliance with a deficiency in appropriations here, that the government was shut down. That's why we were closing these departments and riffing the people who work there, and it's the fault of this deficiency, not my executive decision to impound anything or redirect funding or defy acts of Congress that authorized certain agencies, et cetera, but rather a function of the shutdown. And then if the longer the shutdown went on, the longer the pain of not having paychecks was impacting people, and they began looking for other work and resigning their jobs and never to return to federal employment. A valid worry, but somewhat tempered by the fact that this was happening anyway. And also, it should be noted that there are others who likewise have studied the mechanics of the laws surrounding shutdowns and said, it's not, in fact, the case that it gets any easier or that the president has greater latitude or leeway for doing these things in the shutdown context than otherwise. So there's significant disagreement about that, and some significant resentment among certain sectors where people said, no, I think that's actually misleading and not true, and it doesn't help anything to pretend that it's true and to use that as an excuse. So there's been some real disagreement about whether or not this is a correct, Sheldon Whitehouse's and others, is a correct reading of what effect a shutdown has on Trump's ability to do all these things. Plus, on top of that, there's, and this cuts both ways. Yes, he's already doing this even when there's not a government in shutdown. By the same token, I suppose you could say, so let me get this straight. You studied the laws and mechanics of how shutdown works under current statute. What makes you think that the current statute would be followed in this situation? There is that. It's worth noting. So now I'll continue on with what Sheldon Whitehouse was telling people, and, earnestly enough. I don't know whether other people accused him of, you don't believe what you're saying. I don't know if that's true. But anyway, he goes on to argue that the horrible stuff that they're now doing illegally and sloppily with their dodgy muskrats, they could do in shutdown mode under a veneer of legality directed by Trump's Project 2025 OMB, with added executive powers from declaring an emergency. MAGA extremists and their spineless Congress would decide what agencies or parts of agencies to bring back out of shutdown and when. Defense, Homeland Security, and the VA, with parts that they don't like removed, would likely come back first. He says come first, but I think he means come back first, just by way of clarification. But when would they bring back the Department of Education out of shutdown, or the EPA? Ever? What courts would they keep open for essential judicial functions with Roberts' blessing? The MAGA-ized Fifth Circuit, Trump's MAGA district judges. And again, ordinarily you would say, they don't really have the option to pick and choose which courts would be opened again once the shutdown ended. But, I guess a lawless regime might try to pretend that they do. And that's sort of a valid worry, but I don't think it has anything to do with the shutdown per se. But I understand the idea that the shutdown might add additional confusion and be used as a disguise for the claim of legality, at least temporarily. And then afterwards, when the government was funded again, if they opted not to open things up again, we'll deal with the illegality when that happens, they might say. I was willing, he says, to walk into that valley of government death to bring the battle to a head and to make a clear break between sides, and, I believe, help brightly spotlight for voters the evil at work, but it's reasonable to reach the other conclusion, and good people did. House Democrats had a clear path. First, stick together to challenge Republicans to unify their oddball majority, and when that happened, stick together for a protest vote once they could do nothing. They almost completely did, and good for them. There was the one Democratic Jared Golden rogue vote, but basically he's saying, in a majoritarian house, that thing was going to pass if the Republicans could unify, and once they unified, there was nothing that any Democrat could do to stop it, so it was kind of a free protest vote, is what he's saying. But he says Senate Democrats had to handle actual shutdown dynamite. It was a different set of choices for my Senate colleagues, and that's a reasonable thing to say. I don't know how you react to it, but it's a reasonable thing to say. Shutdown or no shutdown, that was in our hands. Good people had to make hard choices between horrible alternatives. Democrats and pundits love a good family feud, but we're in a battle for our democracy against dangerous forces, and every moment we spend quarreling amongst ourselves lets the other team score when we fight. It's a luxury we cannot afford. And then he offers some weird, endorsement of Hakeem Jeffries. Here's the leadership change we need. We need, not getting rid of Chuck Schumer, but rather to make Leader Jeffries Speaker Jeffries, to check the Trump administration's wanton destruction and end the madness. Any effort not targeted to that goal is a waste at best and harm at worst. That would be better, and we should want that, and you should be working towards it. Whether or not Jeffries is your first choice for Democratic leader in the House or not, that's where it stands. And if you want to think of it as being able to choose a different speaker because there's a Democratic majority, I would accept that at this point. That's okay. I don't really love the idea of heading into a House majority fighting over leadership positions, but I can understand why others would. As long as you have the majority, let's do that first. And you can't fully just say, well, let bygones be bygones. Let's not hold anybody accountable for this collapse, reversal, cave, agreement to do some terrible thing for terrible reasons, whatever you want to characterize it at. It's not like you're supposed to just forget about it, but you can and probably should put it aside for a little while and say, well, let's hope that we one day have the good fortune to worry about whether or not Chuck Schumer should be majority leader again. We'll make that decision and cross that bridge when we come to it, and it won't be up to us anyway, of course, unless he's not in office, which is a possibility, but it's not something you want to take care of at the general election level. And I think you all know what I mean there. But, all right, well, that was of some interest. And there was a few other items that made similar arguments. And, man, I don't know. Let's see. As a matter of fact, I think if I'm not mistaken, somewhere along the line, there it is, Rosalind McGregor shared a similar set of arguments, or one that ends up in the same place, that comes from Rachel Bitecofer, who basically said the same thing. And we definitely entertained this as a possible explanation for why certain Democratic senators were jumping out of the way. We reminded everybody, remember when it was in vogue to say that the better mode of dealing with the Trump administration in Congress was not just pure resistance and pure pushback on everything, but not to offer any help to them, yes, but also not to get in their way when they were doing something stupid and making a big mistake. And that could easily be interpreted as, well, maybe we need to let them wreck things with this CR to show people how bad it can get. Although I'm rarely a fan of that kind of an approach. Rachel Bitecofer was offering an explanation why that might be preferable and why that might be the case of what's happening here. I don't know if I want to read through the entirety of the piece here, but I'll just put it on the record that she is talking about this CR vote and saying, yeah, the thing to do maybe maybe I can skip down here. By securing a 6-month CR, Democrats have also secured 6 months of press attention squarely where it needs to be, on Trump, Elon, Dodgy, and the Republican Party's extremism. The theory here is, how'd you shut down the government instead? As we saw on Friday, there was some significant disagreement about how will the electorate react, how will media react. Media you can almost assuredly count on to at least distort things such that they seemed primed to offer up, if not direct blame for Democrats for shutting down the government, even though it's supposed to be the responsibility of the majority party. They would be pointing at the filibuster thing and saying the Democrats are the ones who stood in the way of the government remaining open, even though it defies all logic. And, it's certainly the onus is on the majority party, and especially when you have a trifecta. But the reality is that the filibuster can still stand in the way. And there's so much wrapped up in that. You could spend an hour on that as well. But she was saying, as long as there's the opportunity to confuse the issue, you could pretty much count on people confusing the issue. And so the better alternative was to kind of jump out of the way, as bad as it is and as bad as the CR is and as terrible as the things that it enables might be, and there's writing on that to share with you as well. At least if the story wasn't shut down, And the story is, in fact, well, the government continues with funding, and now all of the bad things that Dodgy and Musk and Russ Vought and Donald Trump are doing are the only game in town. She has a point there. I don't love voting for the CR, and I certainly wouldn't have, and you didn't need to. I guess but that was the trick. That was the play. Well, we'll vote for cloture, and then they'll vote to pass the thing, and there will be activists mad at us, and it's true, and they might even be right about it. But, the gamble anyway, I don't know if it's the right vote. I don't know if it's the right choice, but the gamble was this way. Everyone's focus will be on the terrible things that Dodgy is doing. So instead of headlines about us shutting down the government to launch a war we could not win against a party with no motivation to reopen the government, Trump will remain the greatest show on earth. This, too, a point of contention as between the 2, 3, 10 sides on this question, that the Republicans have no motivation to reopen the government. If we were able to block the cloture motion, couldn't get to a vote on final passage of the CR, government closes. Big disagreement as to whether or not Republicans try to open it again or not. On the one hand, you have, they love chaos and they wanted to shut down the government. They were firing people left and right and closing departments even without the CR funding having run out. So why wouldn't they continue to do that while the CR funding does run out? Yes, there is that. But there's also, didn't we just talk about how extraordinary it was and how much effort Republicans had to make to unify such that they didn't need any Democratic votes to pass the CR? Why did they do that? They were desperate to pass the CR because at least some of them do remember, as Greg pointed out a number of times, that historically, whatever the situation is, whatever shoe or whatever foot the shoe happens to be on, with majority control of one house, two houses, both, trifecta, Republicans tend to end up with the blame for government shutdowns because they're the ones that tend to promote them. Now here they were looking to do anything they could to avoid it, and they worked very hard to get even their crazies on board to vote to reopen the government. So I don't know how willing they would have been to keep the government shut in order to execute more of these closures. I think there's a good argument to be made. They were very uncomfortable with the idea of shutdown. That's why they worked so hard, and they all voted not to shut down the government. But that's in their normal circumstances. Is it easy to see them saying or getting marching orders from the White House? Look, we want you to unify behind keeping the government open. That way we can claim more credibly that if it doesn't happen, it's the Democrats' fault, even though historically it's always fallen on us. But if none of us vote, if there's unity and we are saying that we want to open the place, and then Democrats block it at the cloture level, we got a historic opportunity to reverse things, to do some political judo here. And for the first time, maybe convince the media that Democrats are at fault here. And if they don't go along with it, or they don't fall for it, and they block it anyway, and the government closes, then we shift our position. Well, okay, if you are not going to cooperate with us, then screw it. We're not going to try to reopen the government, and we'll just let it sit there, and we'll execute these secondary plans for shutting things down and make claims about the legality of it all under the guise of the shutdown, even if that's not really truly legally available to us. We'll say it is. So, okay, that's a real possibility. However, I will also say that somewhere in pocket here, and I think it'll take me some time to find it now, but if I'm not mistaken, I put together, is this the one here? No, that's not even it. We haven't even gotten to the other major story of the weekend, which is an immigration one. Right here. So standing, at least headline-wise, athwart this other argument that no, keeping the government closed or closing the government would result in a worse outcome from our perspective here. There's also the Washington Post piece here from Friday. Jeff Stein behind this one here. Funding bill grants Trump, Musk more control over federal spending. So you have, on the one hand, people saying, well, if you shut down the government, you're giving Trump and Musk more control over federal spending. But on the other hand, what about granting them more control by actually keeping the government open? Oh, so really no great choices here. Let's see what this one argues. Legislation that the Senate passed on Friday, of course, averts a government shutdown, but probably gives the White House and DOGE more power to decide how to allocate funds. So you could be forgiven if you found yourself confused by the arguments that said, no, it's worse to close the government. No, it's worse to keep the government open. We'll see whether this one is more or less convincing. The spending bill that the Senate passed on Friday could bolster President Trump's push to wrest power away from Congress, giving the administration even greater control over the budget as he seeks to shrink the federal government. And it's easy to believe that this is the case, given that we knew that the CR was not clean and it carried a lot of baggage along with it. And there were early claims that I saw, it wasn't just on Friday that they came up with this one, that, some of the language in the CR would have that effect. Trump and billionaire Elon Musk's U.S. DOGE service have aggressively pushed the legal limits of the president's power over government spending, dismantling departments and eliminating hundreds, if not thousands, of federal functions without authorization by lawmakers. That is, of course, all true. And we saw many, many examples of it. Almost time for our music and exiting for the top of the hour break. But although courts have blocked some of those moves, many congressional Democrats had hoped to use the deadline over government funding to force Republicans to reverse or at least limit the Trump administration's unilateral cuts. But the GOP-written spending bill, pushed through the House on a near-party line vote by Speaker Mike Johnson earlier this week, last week of course, could give Trump a freer hand to redirect funds as he sees fit. Let's delve further into that after this break. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. What were we going to delve into? Further into Jeff Stein's article in the Washington Post, and I know lots of you are hating and mistrusting the Washington Post these days, but it's an interesting argument that's being made here, which is that the CR contained language that would arguably bolster Trump's veneer of legality in doing his damage through DOGE and other partial governmental closures, rather than resorting to closure of the entire federal government and selective reopening. Two very different approach. Well, not even all that different, really, but two different approaches or two different veneers of legality, I guess. And I guess when you're dealing with a president that, doesn't really, honor the rule of law and just says, well, anything that I do is legal, no matter when I do it or under what circumstances, I guess it's very difficult to decide which one you think is better. The veneer of legality for closing things while the entirety of the government is closed, or the veneer of legality claimed that this CR grants additional powers. I don't know. Let's read what the explanation here. The GOP-written spending bill, as we said, pushed through the House on a near party line vote, minus Massey, I guess, by Speaker Johnson, could give Trump a freer hand to redirect funds as he sees fit, according to congressional Democrats, the same crowd that was just arguing to us, no, it was actually better to pass the thing after all. Congressional Democrats and several nonpartisan budget experts. Let's see what we've got. Regular appropriations laws are agreed to with accompanying reports that detail with great specificity how money should be spent. That's true under the normal circumstances. Rather than passing a CR, you have 12 different appropriations bills passed, well ahead of the end of the fiscal year, and the subcommittees that are responsible for each of the 12 do issue accompanying reports, as they say here, which normally give great specificity on how money should be spent. And when you're passing a CR, or sometimes when you're passing one omnibus bill and you've skipped the regular appropriations process, you don't have that written guidance all the time. And I guess certainly for a CR, you don't have it. Not that it automatically means you don't. You could prepare such a report, but often, and in this case, they did not. So in the last fiscal year, for instance, an appropriations law allocated $3.2 billion for the EPA and its operations, and the accompanying report specified amounts devoted to cleaning brownfields, ensuring clean air, carrying out environmental justice programs, and many other functions. The measure that lawmakers passed this week is, of course, what's known as a continuing resolution that largely extends funding at existing levels and does not, though, include the additional instructions from Congress. So while the EPA would get the same $3.2 billion that Congress allocated to it earlier, the administration could repurpose funds from the specific programs that they were intended to cover. That is a possibility. Democrats had hoped to include language in the bill requiring Trump to spend all the money in the measure and potentially thwart the unilateral cuts that Trump and Musk are pursuing to agencies like the Education Department and the Social Security Administration. But because Johnson was able to persuade all but one House Republican to back the measure, the GOP didn't need any Democratic votes, which meant Republicans didn't need to negotiate over that language before sending the bill to the Senate, where enough Democrats agreed to let the measure proceed to ease passage Friday and avert a shutdown. And that was also an argument well made by Democrats who opposed both the cloture motion and the bill itself, including Sheldon Whitehouse, of course. But it's a good argument all by itself. This bill was passed in the House entirely by Republicans, which they knew very well meant that they did not have to negotiate with Democrats at all. There was no Democratic input to this bill whatsoever. Why would you support its passage? And it's only because you believe you're being held hostage that you would agree to its passage. Anyway, back to what Jeff Stein had written here. It's a huge move to give the White House and DOGE more power of the purse. They will have much more discretion over how to spend money, said Charles Kiefer, who served in senior positions in the White House Budget Office and recently aided Democrats on the Senate Appropriations Committee. Some Democrats, such as Senate Minority Leader Charles E. Schumer, perhaps you've heard of him, have maintained that the party would be in an even worse place if Democrats rejected the deal and triggered a government shutdown. On the Senate floor, Schumer called the GOP bill a terrible option, but added, "I believe allowing Donald Trump to take even more power via a government shutdown is a far worse option." The White House Budget Office did not release its plans for a shutdown, why would they, which are typically made public ahead of a lapse in funding. The president has wide latitude to decide which portions of the government continue operating when spending bills expire, with some workers remaining on the job without pay and others furloughed. And that's true. And I did see that in advance of the vote in the Senate. And it was a good reminder and a valid reminder that, again, the direction for who does and doesn't have to show up for work during a government shutdown is an OPM call. But the OPM, of course, an arm of the executive branch and unitary executive, yada, yada, yada. And, it's not, it wouldn't be considered unusual for the president or White House to give some direction to the OPM in this, in deciding what should and shouldn't remain open. It's not like they're independent the way we used to, anyway. Consider the Justice Department independent. But there was very rarely any need for White House direction to the OPM on things like that. They basically had a standard playbook in both Republican and Democratic administrations on how to deal with shutdowns, and it was just done on that basis. For the Trump administration to intervene, well, one, that would require some work on their part, so I didn't know whether they were really going to do that, but some people were very anxious to do that work. Russell Vought and Stephen Miller, perhaps others. So they would be anxious to do it, and there wouldn't be any institutional barrier standing in the way to White House guidance, though you might very well correctly be able to point out it's unusual for there to be any. At any rate, the White House Budget Office did not release any such plans. And many Democrats and some independent budget experts also feared that the administration would have enacted far-reaching changes to the federal workforce during a shutdown. A long furlough could have opened up new legal avenues to terminate some federal employees. And I did see some back and forth and real disagreement about whether or not there was, in fact, a provision that, as some were claiming, well, after 30 days of shutdown, it becomes that much easier somehow legally to permanently fire furloughed employees. And then I saw others writing, no, that's not a correct interpretation of the way the law works. Of course, out there also is what value is a correct interpretation of how the law works in this day and age. And I guess that's a valid point too. But Jeff Stein continues by saying simply that not all experts agree that the continuing resolution marks a significant inflection point. The government had been operating under an earlier continuing resolution passed in December that already extended last year's funding. Some note that a similar funding structure was in effect for 2 years during the Obama administration. Continuing resolutions rather than normal appropriations laws have become an increasingly common method of funding the government, frequently used to avert shutdowns in past administrations. Trump does gain some additional flexibility there, but the question here is, compared to what? Said David Super, that's some name, a administrative law professor. They're correct. They got it right. I didn't. At Georgetown University, Democrats believe if they reached an agreement, the appropriators would express themselves more clearly in those bills, which would provide useful constraints. I don't know if that's a realistic projection. Still, the bill could play an important role in Trump's broader battle in the balance of power between the branches of government. The Constitution puts Congress in charge of spending, but F that. But since his first term, Trump and top advisors have argued that the executive branch should have much more ability to cancel and redirect federal dollars without lawmakers weighing in. I mean, no basis for it. They just want it. The White House Budget Director, Russell Vought, has vowed to challenge the constitutionality of a 1974 law that limits the president's authority to unilaterally cancel or redirect spending, impoundment. A battle expected to land in court in the coming months as well. But the bill lawmakers passed this week could give Trump authority to move some funding around without fear of judicial intervention. Senator Patty Murray of Washington, the top Democratic appropriator, published a list of dozens of examples of programs that the measure could allow Trump to change. For instance, Trump would have, quote, near absolute, unquote, authority over specific Army Corps of Engineers projects, much more authority to pick which healthcare or mental health programs to implement, and broad discretion over Centers for Disease Control and Prevention programs, according to Murray's office. It absolutely opens up more flexibility for Trump, said Jessica Riedel, R-I-E-D-L, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Not really the people we should be listening to, but okay. They're a center-right think tank, according to this. I would say they're a right think tank. He still can't reduce spending levels beyond what was approved, but he would have more latitude because the directions, earmarks, and goals may lapse. I guess that's what makes, at least that opinion, a center-right issuance. If not, if Manhattan Institute isn't center-right, then that might count as center-right because she thinks impoundment is still not a thing. And that's now not a right-wing position. And, whilst it was always centrist, I don't know what to tell you. I guess most think tank people are just saying, no, you can impound things left and right if you feel like it. All right, well, that's the end of Jeff Stein's exposition of things here. But I just wanted to sort of point out to you that there's not necessarily agreement about which option was worse and why. there's a lot of back and forth behind the scenes, and we'd have to do some more reading and evaluating before we came to a decision about whether or not we found the arguments about what powers Trump would have in shutdown are valid or not. And I'm not even certain that it's worth spending the time doing that, given that he recognizes no limitations on his powers anyway. So we could evaluate what we think is within the letter of the law, but he's operating outside of the letter of the law, and I'm not sure that we would feel in the end like we spent our time wisely. So at any rate, of course, the government is open and does continue to operate, and you might as well just evaluate how well it's doing that and document the atrocities from that point forward. And although you can be certainly justifiably mad at Democratic senators who voted at the wrong moment to go along with this, I would just say, maybe we defer punishment, if there is any, to some later date, and instead focus on what's before us. And you don't have to forgive and forget, but you can prioritize. I suppose there's that. Okay, so what other crazy things are going on? Well, let's see. First of all, I guess we have to mention what's happening immigration-wise over the weekend. Let's see. We, of course, have rogue-seeming arrests and deportations going on. Not only student activists at Columbia, and not only the student activists we've heard of so far, but of course that expanding to encompass other activists as well. And then on the non-Columbia front, I guess, there have been other deportations, and some featured in some of the national papers. I know USA Today did another feature on yet another couple where the husband voted for Trump and his wife is now in an ICE detention center because she's, while a legal resident of the country, not a citizen, maybe even a green card holder, but not a citizen, and so therefore something. What happened? Did they just go and knock on their door and grab them? No, they had to leave the mainland United States. I think they went to Puerto Rico on a trip, and then in coming home, ended up snatching her up, I think on the basis of her having, the claim being that there perhaps was some outstanding warrant because she had not showed up for a court date like years in the past. I guess they're really diving around looking for excuses to grab people. And that's bad news. You don't want them doing that because, well, there are other priorities they could be enforcing here. But at any rate, it was a big source of weekend leopards eating faces, entertainment for some, and opportunity to express reluctant sorrow for others. But then I guess a higher profile story, we should put it on the record here, and I have something from the locals in Providence, Rhode Island, covering the story of the Brown medical school professor deported despite a federal court order saying, no, you can't. And that goes hand in hand with the really super splashy case of alleged Venezuelan gang members rounded up by immigration authorities here in the United States and deported very controversially to El Salvador, which is, of course, not their country of origin, if they even are Venezuelan and if they even are gang members. That's another level of the problem, but there are many levels to this problem. But if you accept the explanation that they're Venezuelan gang members, you still don't get to why are they being deported to El Salvador. Venezuela likely wouldn't accept the flight bringing them in. There's a super crazy sounding controversial arrangement by which the government of El Salvador, we heard about this a couple of weeks ago, agreed to take payment in exchange for taking prisoners from the United States. So if all these people are who they say they are, you're still doing weird things like why not deport them to Venezuela? Why El Salvador? Why are we paying El Salvador to put them in prison? What's up with the prison standards in El Salvador anyway? What's going on here? And it's just, another flex by the Trump administration to say, they have looser standards about how they have to treat their prisoners there. And that's why we want them in El Salvador and not here in the United States. Is it more efficient? Are we paying less money to incarcerate them there than we are in the United States? Unclear, and it wouldn't matter, even though it would be hypocrisy given Department of Government efficiency. How could you pay more to put them there? That's not efficiency. And even if it is less money to pay and therefore more efficient, are you disregarding human rights? Yes, sure, of course. And violating international law? Maybe, yes, I don't know. But on top of all of that, there was, you go to court over these things, all these super crazy legal questions. Shouldn't the whole thing be called off, and shouldn't you turn those planes around and bring them back to the United States and adjudicate this thing correctly? And the judge is saying, yes, absolutely you should. And the Trump administration essentially, pulling all sorts of shenanigans. Can we have a 1 hour recess to brief you on this thing? Yeah, sure. And while they have the recess, calling up the ICE and saying to get those planes off the ground during this recess so that it's too late in case we lose this motion. And doing it and having the judge find out about it and say, I don't care that they're already off the ground. Turn those planes around and bring them back. And having the administration say, just not going to happen. No, we're not bringing them back. And all sorts of excuses offered. Well, those planes had cleared international airspace, so they weren't subject to your jurisdiction. Well, the people operating the flights are subject to our jurisdiction. They're American citizens and they're coming back here. And no, clearing international airspace doesn't actually have anything to do with it. That's just not the way the law works. Well, it's the way we're going to work it. And now you have to deal with that reality. But before we get to that story, first, the story in the Providence Journal. Tom Mooney of the Providence Journal reporting Brown medicine doctor. And I know that's weird because you're talking about Brown University. They know that, of course, they're in Providence. For the rest of us, the doctor is Brown. But that's not what we're talking about. Brown medicine doctor deported despite federal court order. What we know. What's happening? A federal court order that would have halted the immediate deportation of a Rhode Island doctor was issued Friday evening while the doctor's departing plane sat on the tarmac at Boston Logan International Airport, said a friend and colleague of the doctor. But the plane ultimately took off, carrying Dr. Rasha Alloway out of the country for reasons still unclear to her family, her lawyer, and Brown medicine colleagues such as Dr. Basma Merhi. They did not do anything to stop the plane, said Merhi. It's Merhi, in case you want to look that up. But they didn't do anything to stop the plane, said Merhi, who was learning details of the event through information relayed by Alloway family members. So clearly they wanted to deport her regardless of if there was a judge's order or not. She didn't do anything wrong. Alloway had been studying and working in the U.S. for the last 6 years and had been in Rhode Island working for Brown Medicine in the Division of Kidney Disease and Hypertension since last July. She worked at Rhode Island Hospital evaluating potential transplant recipients and following the progress of those patients after their procedures. Dr. George Bayless, the Transplant Division's medical director, said on Saturday, U.S. District Judge Leo T. Sorokin in Massachusetts issued an order that Dr. Rasha Alloway, 34, who had been detained at Logan Airport on Thursday after returning from visiting family in Lebanon, not be deported without giving the court 48 hours notice. We need to evaluate the legality of all this. You're not allowed to deport her without 48 hours notice to the court. And the Trump administration went the other way on that one. Decided to deport her regardless. Despite his order, the Brown medicine kidney doctor and Lebanese citizen departed for Paris Friday evening. Alloway arrived back in Lebanon Sunday morning, said a friend and colleague. Alloway's lawyer alleged, quote, that Customs and Border Patrol received an actual notice of the court's order. The order, of course, giving the court demanding 48 hours notice before any deportation, and nonetheless thereafter willfully disobeyed the order by sending her out of the United States. Sorokin ordered that federal authorities, quote, shall respond to these serious allegations with a legal and factual response setting forth its version of events. This response is also due by 8:30 a.m. Monday, March 17th, 2025. So already 2 hours since that was due. I don't know if they got it or not. But all of that needs to be in so that it is available to the court and the petitioner in advance of the hearing on Monday. The hearing is set for 10 a.m., already underway there, at the John J. Moakley Courthouse in Boston. You remember John Moakley? Oh, I do. Okay. Anyway, customs officials at Logan detained Alloway on Thursday as she was returning from a 2-week trip home to Lebanon to visit family, said Mary and lawyer Thomas S. Brown, who handles immigration and visa issues for doctors affiliated with Brown Medicine. Isn't that interesting? The lawyer's name is Brown. He works for Brown University, and I don't know whether there's any connection or not. Brown said Alloway was returning to the U.S. on an H-1B visa that she had recently acquired at the American consulate in Lebanon. And at least there you can say, well, okay, H-1B visa. She's a transplant surgeon. I mean, that's pretty specialized, right? So, well applied there, I think, but didn't matter in the end. The H-1B is a temporary visa category that allows employers to petition for highly educated foreign professionals to work in specialty occupations. Seems like they hit the nail on the head this time, right? The visa allowed her to be lawfully in the country through the middle of 2027, said Brown. Brown said on Friday, as Alloway was being detained at the airport, that there had been some wrinkle in her visa application that had been relatively easy to work out because they did issue the visa. So whatever's going on is not the consequence of the actions at the American consulate, as far as I know. She was clear to return. She had the visa. She had the right passport. Everything was looking good. Next up, on Friday, Alloway's friends and families moved quickly to attempt to prevent her deportation. Her cousin, Yara Chehab, I'm guessing at that pronunciation, filed a complaint in U.S. District Court in Massachusetts against officials at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. In the complaint, Chehab says federal authorities had unlawfully detained her cousin without any justification and without permitting her access to their counsel. The complaint notes that Alloway had graduated from medical school in 2015 and held her fellowships and residencies at 3 U.S. universities. Despite repeated requests from Dr. Alloway's family members and a volunteer attorney, CBP refuses to provide any justification for their detention, refuses to allow the attorneys to talk to Dr. Alloway, and refuses to provide assurances that Dr. Alloway will not be deported to Lebanon. What did the judge's orders say? On Friday, Judge Sorokin issued an order saying Alloway could not leave Massachusetts without 48 hours notice given to the court to give them time to consider the matter. It's unclear if the court order reached immigration officials in time, although earlier it said no, they did, didn't it? Ryan Brissett, spokesman for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, did not return any emails about it on Saturday morning. Bayless, the head of the transplant division, said he's outraged at what happened. He then goes ahead and says it, a quote, "I'm outraged at it for my colleague and I'm outraged at it as a citizen. This is government action without due process and ignoring the courts. So that strikes me as capricious and arbitrary," even though he got that backwards. He needs to talk to the Brown law professors on that one. Mary said Saturday that Alloway had been given a 2-minute phone call when her plane landed in Paris. She called her mother and told her not to worry. She's being held there at the airport in a detention facility until she flies on to Lebanon on Sunday, she said. It's now Monday, so I suppose that's happened. "They're treating her like a terrorist," said Mary. "This is ridiculous. She's an accomplished doctor. She's treating patients, and now she's treated like a criminal. And she's following all the rules. She's not doing anything wrong, and her visa is valid." Well, all of that adds up to what the hell's going on here, and you might wonder about it, and why did they target her, and how did they even become aware of her? Maybe that's, who knows? Maybe it's a function of them digging through the files, the dodgy boys, searching for people that they think they can just, deport at their whim. But I don't know. Basically, the Trump administration lawyers are standing around there saying, enjoying the idea that there's no clear definition of what it means to say, yeah, I heard the judge's order. Yes, I received it. Some people say they received it. Some people say they never did. We don't know. We got to have a hearing on whether or not they received the orders. It's really getting to that point, huh? All right. We'll be right back for one more segment. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. Okay, welcome back everybody to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on with this reading, even though again there's about 50,000 things happening that still require more attention from us here. But let's continue with this story from the Providence Journal, just so we can get to the end of it. Dr. Alloway had been studying and working in the United States for the last 6 years, had been in Rhode Island working for Brown Medicine in the kidney transplant division, as we were saying, and then essentially grabbed at Logan Airport on her way back from... I guess we actually did reach the end of the article here, but just recapping here. Grabbed on her way back to a visit from Lebanon, though she was traveling back with a valid passport and a valid visa, H-1B visa, just turned around and deported with no, as far as I can tell, no reason given, certainly nothing released publicly and nothing discussed here in this article. I'm sure CBP thought they were doing something, but then they were ordered not to deport her and claimed not to have seen the order. That's really rather extraordinary, even though, let's see, where did they mention this up top? That despite his order, the doctor was departing, right? They were supposed to give 48 hours notice. Right, and then he was asking for a response. But I feel like there was discussion earlier on about when the order reached CBP officials, that they got the notice while her plane was still on the tarmac. That's right, a federal court order that would have halted the immediate deportation was issued Friday evening while the doctor's plane sat on the tarmac. Okay, so I guess that's the discrepancy. The order was issued while she was on the tarmac. But I guess some question, how do you communicate this order? Do you have to drive it over to the airport? Well, you're going to miss the plane taking off if it's sitting on the tarmac waiting to take off, if you have to drive it from the courthouse. Can you call? Do they just not answer the phone call? Do they answer the phone call and say, all right, I'll give them the message? And then you could see how even an earnest effort to relay the order might not necessarily make it in time. Anyway, similar excuses being offered over in the other big what would you call it, deportation controversy, and that of the claimed gang members from Venezuela. And I have, there's like 5 different versions or pieces of this story that are parked here in pocket. One, I'm not certain which one we need to get them all properly documented here, but let's see. We've got the Washington Post. White House official says 137 immigrants deported under Alien Enemies Act. And that's sort of an important portion of the thing, just the justification, quote unquote justification used to do this deportation. Level 1 of all the problems here. Trump officials said the deportations don't violate a judge's order barring the use of the Alien Enemies Act for removals, but also questioned the order's validity. So many things going on here. One, the use of the Alien Enemies Act, which sounds weird, but you might actually remember from high school civics at some point. Just one of those things that's sort of planted in your brain as this happened historically, and this is one of the early experiments with things going awry in the early American Republic that we generally teach our kids. This is one of the big no-nos, one of the big mistakes that were made, even by the founders themselves. You'll remember them as the Alien and Sedition Act. Now, sedition is something we ended up having to revive and charge Trump supporters with for their activities on January 6th, 2021, but for which they're all pardoned, regardless. And then the other part of it we haven't had to discuss for quite a while. Alien Enemies Act of 1798, basically taught in passing almost in American history courses as, this was when the American government wasn't entirely sure what its limitations were going to be under the brand new Constitution. But we found out pretty quickly as they decided both the Alien and Sedition Acts were federal government overreaches. But guess who's trying to make those reaches again now? It's Donald Trump. So what's going on here? Marianne Levine, Maria Sacchetti, Joyce Sohyun Lee, and Natalie Ellison teaming up here. Is this an all-female lineup? Terrific. All right. Well, these 4 women, I assume, I'm assuming genders. That's true. The names present as female, though they may designate otherwise. Anyway, that's the byline for the Washington Post piece. More than half of the 261 immigrants expelled to El Salvador on Saturday, this is only one aspect of this crazy story, were swept out of the United States using a Wartime Powers Act. Are we at war? That's the issue here. We're not. There's no issue. There's no war going on. Congress declares war, et cetera, et cetera. But what's happening here is Trump is advancing MAGA Republican right-wing social media rhetoric into policy. Well, we should be able to do this because immigration is an invasion of this country. That's the claim. You've heard that a million times before. And now he's saying, well, if it's an invasion, then it's a war. And if it's a war, then I have the right to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 or whatever the hell we're talking about here and deport them under that authority. Really? With no court review at all? Yeah, because we're doing it before anybody can get it to court. And if you do rush and get to the court, we're ignoring the court. Levels 2 through 100 of this story. All right. So more than half of the 261 people sent to El Salvador, why are we sending them to El Salvador? Another aspect of this story. Were swept out of the United States using a Wartime Powers Act, the White House official said on Sunday, amid questions about whether the Trump administration is flouting a judge's order barring the use of that statute to hasten deportations. President Donald Trump secretly, signed a proclamation. Does he ever sign anything in secret? I don't know. But now I guess that prospect has been raised, and all the more reason why you should never accept paperwork from him on its face ever. Secretly signed a proclamation, it is said, and I think that is linked, and I grabbed the story that links to. which was of some interest. The headline there, after judge blocks Alien Enemies Act, White House claims nearly 300 already deported. What do you know? They just don't care what the judges are saying. So, Trump secretly signs this proclamation on Friday, invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, saying he would quickly remove Venezuelans aged 14 and over who allegedly belong to the transnational gang Tren de Aragua. And remember, that was I guess we first saw them injected into the discourse when it was claimed during the campaign that this gang was in control of entire public housing facilities in Aurora, Colorado. Whether there was any basis to that or not, we don't know. Doesn't matter to these guys, but they're following up on this. They've I guess they've stopped, not really entirely, crying about, oh my God, MS-13 is ruining everything. Now they found out another gang name, and they're saying that gang is ruining everything. Since then, 137 people were dispatched to the Central American nation, El Salvador, via the proclamation, according to the White House official who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the Trump administration's enforcement strategy. Why not somebody who actually is allowed to speak about this strategy? They're proud of it. Can't find anybody that can go on the record. The rest were removed under other federal laws, including 23 people from El Salvador, actually, with ties to the MS-13 gang, and 101 additional Venezuelans, the official said. So we're talking about 137 people, Venezuelans, who are said to be members of Tren de Aragua, plus 23 people who are actually from El Salvador. Those are the ones tied to MS-13. They're still saying we've got that problem. And then there's 101 additional people on board this flight or who have been deported who are Venezuelans who are being deported to El Salvador, not as Tren de Aragua members, but for some other reason and still ending up in El Salvador, and we don't know why. The U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, Boasberg, on Saturday temporarily blocked Trump from using the act to swiftly remove immigrants without a hearing and instructed officials to return any airplanes carrying them to the United States. He ruled after advocates sued, saying the administration was denying immigrants due process and putting them in danger. And, of course, that is all true. And it's important, one, to note the judge, Boasberg, because the Republicans are putting up pictures of him and giving out identifying information and wink, wink, threatening him the whole time. Meanwhile, insisting that anybody who says anything negative about Donald Trump ought to be arrested, but what have you. That's happening all over the place. But they're trying to make a big deal out of the judge personally. And then, of course, these orders having been ignored. And, big point underlying all of this is that he's used the Alien Enemies Act to claim that his move to deport them without any kind of immigration hearing, without any sort of due process whatsoever, such that you don't know the names of the people on that flight. You don't know the accusations made against the people on those flights with specificity. Other than that, some number of them are accused of being gang members. What is the evidence of their being gang members? None presented. Don't have to if you're deporting them under the Alien Enemies Act, apparently. Except, was that a legal application of the Alien Enemies Act? Judge says no. Judge says there has to be some evidence that these people are not citizens, that they are here illegally in some fashion, that they have some affiliation with the gang, that any of these things that they say about them are actually true. Do you have any evidence? You're going to have to present something, because if you don't, I'm going to block this deportation. But then they just say, well, we're doing the deportation anyway. So now what do you do? Earlier on Sunday, Trump administration officials shared video footage from El Salvador that showed shackled immigrants being forced off airplanes at night and into a new mega prison. And then guess what people are saying about it? Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele posted on Twitter, "Oopsie, too late." That's exactly what was posted, referring to the judge's decision. Now, he doesn't owe any deference or respect to a United States federal judge, I guess. But there you go. Followed by a laughing emoji. And Who reposted it but Secretary of State Marco Rubio? And a White House spokesman responded with the meme saying, boom. So they're pretty proud of it and not worried about mocking the authority of federal judges. Bukele said the United States sent his country 238 members of the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang and more than 20 members of the Salvadoran MS-13 gang. Again, some discrepancy in the numbers there. He released a 3-minute video that showed the alleged gang members escorted off 3 planes by heavily armed men wearing camouflage as dramatic music played. The men were loaded onto buses and taken to the prison where their heads were shaved. El Salvador and the United States said the United States will pay for the prisoners to be jailed. Thank you for your assistance and friendship, President Bukele, Rubio posted on Twitter. Trump later reposted the video on social media and thanked the Salvadoran leader for his, quote, understanding of this horrible situation. Rubio did not say how much the United States is paying, and State Department officials did not respond to questions on Sunday. Trump's decision to deploy the Alien Enemies Act for the first time since World War II, when it paved the way for the internment of more than 110,000 Japanese Americans, and of course, that has its problems, alarmed immigration experts, legal scholars, and others. In exercising this wartime power, Trump called for the swift removal of Venezuelans allegedly involved in Tren de Aragua, stripping them of their right to an immigration court hearing. Then it's not a right, then, if you can just strip it that way, is it? The act has been used only 3 times before to bar citizens of hostile enemy governments from the United States, and only during a declared war. Are we in a declared war with Venezuela? We are not. The White House made the proclamation public Saturday afternoon after advocates for immigrants sued the White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Stephen Miller, who roots for Haman, and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, who dresses as Vashti. Just some Purim-themed commentary along the way. Helped facilitate and orchestrate the weekend flights to El Salvador, the White House official said. It didn't really help facilitate them. They just agreed, yeah, we should disobey the law. DHS and U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement did not respond to questions on Sunday, seeking details about the deportations and whether the immigrants were sent to El Salvador in defiance of the judge's order. The spokeswoman for the Salvadoran government referred to the president's statements. Flight records reviewed by the Washington Post showed that 2 flights left for El Salvador as the federal judge was reviewing the case, and a 3rd flight left shortly after a written order was issued. Once again, same thing here. The first two flights took off from Texas at 5:26 p.m. and 5:45 p.m. Eastern Time, according to data from Flight Radar 24, a flight tracking site. Just before 7 p.m. Saturday, Boasberg told the Trump administration that any deportation flights dispatched using the authority of the Alien Act there should return to the United States. About 30 minutes later, a written order to that effect was entered in the court document. 10 minutes after that, a 3rd flight took off from Texas. All 3 made stopovers in Honduras. The first 2 flights arrived in El Salvador at after midnight, 12:10 a.m. and 12:18 a.m. The 3rd landed at 1:08 a.m. Sunday. There was no information made public about which categories of detainees were on each flight. The Post matched the flights by looking at the planes in the video Bukele posted, which were labeled Global X flights, and compared those to only 3 Global X flights arrivals in El Salvador's International Airport on March 15th and 16th. Asked about the timing of the flights, the White House official pushed back on the validity of Boasberg's order, saying a single judge should not have the power to usurp the president's authority. And they don't usurp the president's authority. They merely said we need to review the extent of the president's authority because it seems that he has overstepped it at this point. And, of course, for Republicans to complain about the right of one lone federal judge to change national policy, well, as you know, every Republican accusation is a confession. And Matthew, what's his name? Kaczmarek can attest to that, but won't because he loves to lie about this stuff. So we believe this is a baseless legal ruling, no matter when the flights took off, the official said, adding that the fact that 2 of the 3 deportation flights were out of the country before the judge's order strengthens our case. There's no precedent for that, however, but too bad. They don't care. The Justice Department has said that most, if not all, of those deported under the proclamation were serious criminals. Not that they had any evidence to share with you. But it did not release their names publicly, so that claim couldn't be independently verified. Some of the gang members deported were members of the MS-13 gang tied to El Salvador, or that's the claim anyway, and the proclamation Friday does not appear to include them. You didn't need or bother using the Alien Enemies Act for that one for some reason. The high-profile actions make it clear that the administration will deploy force and fright to remove immigrants from the United States, even if they have to devise extraordinary new ways to do it, such as sending them to a country that is not their home country and putting them in jail. The White House's online mocking of the judicial order by the chief federal judge in Washington, it's not just some lone individual judge, the chief federal judge in Washington, added to the concern among advocates that Trump's determination to carry out the largest mass deportation campaign in U.S. history would sidestep legal and humanitarian norms, like they did. ACLU lawyer Lee Gelernt, Gelernt, who successfully argued for the injunction at the remote hearing before Boasberg, said Sunday that the administration may have subverted the law if it expelled immigrants before alerting the public to Trump's proclamation. The administration was legally required to publish the proclamation before starting to use it. They didn't even do that. But it appears the administration wanted a head start before any lawsuit could be filed, Gelernt said in a statement. We have asked the government this morning if they intend to assure the court that nobody was removed under the proclamation after the court's order. Well, they were. Michael Kozak, a State Department official, top State Department official, said in a court filing Sunday that high-ranking U.S. officials, including Rubio, had been engaged in an intensive and delicate negotiations in recent weeks with El Salvador and Venezuela to deport Tren de Aragua gang members. Officials had recently reached an agreement to deport them, he wrote. Not that anybody checked the legality of it. However, the Justice Department said the original plaintiffs, 5 men from Venezuela, have not been deported. Isn't that interesting? Boasberg later expanded the case to include any Venezuelan who might be subject to Trump's Alien Enemies Act proclamation. So the 5 who filed and said that this thing was ridiculous are still here. Everybody else got deported. Kozak, the senior official overseeing diplomatic relations in the Western Hemisphere, for everybody, I guess, said Boasberg's ruling halting the removals would harm U.S. foreign policy. We had an agreement, and this would declare that agreement illegal on our part anyway. And so that might make the Salvadorans feel bad, and therefore it's bad for U.S. foreign policy. The White House and state led the negotiations, which also included U.S. Special Envoy for Latin America Mauricio Claver Carón and Special Presidential Envoy Richard Grenell, he wrote. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, which will hear the Trump administration's request to stay Boasberg's orders, set a Tuesday deadline for the migrants' lawyers to respond. The government still has until Wednesday to file a rebuttal. The 3-judge panel hearing the case consists of Judges Karen LaCraft Henderson, a Ronald Reagan appointee, Patricia Millett, a Barack Obama appointee. We have to recite all of this now every time we do these things because you can't trust some of these Trump appointees. He's the 3rd one on this. Justin Walker, Trump appointee. Walker was on a 2022 panel that rejected GOP efforts to keep in place a Trump policy that allowed the government to summarily expel asylum seekers and others at the U.S. border. So despite being a Trump appointee, has a record of voting against them and their weirdo violations of immigration law. We'll see whether he has it in him to do that again. Saturday's flights to El Salvador were denounced by the Venezuelan government. The statement posted on Instagram by Foreign Minister Ivan Gil said the country categorically and forcefully rejects the U.S. government's proclamation that infamously and unjustly criminalizes Venezuelan immigration in an act that evokes the darkest episodes of human history, from slavery to the horror of the Nazi concentration camps. Well, all-righty then. The decision to transport the alleged gang members to El Salvador also reignited questions about human rights violations in that country's prison system. After years of high gang-related crime, Bukele declared an emergency in March of 2022, temporarily suspending basic rights and ordering the arrests of thousands of gang members he labeled terrorists and putting them in high-security prisons. Violent crime and mass migration plunged, but human rights groups said the prisons are inhumane. Bukele in February agreed to jail criminals that the U.S. government cannot deport because of strained diplomatic relations with countries such as Venezuela through El Salvador, though El Salvador even offered to jail U.S. citizen offenders. They don't care. You pay for the incarceration, they'll take anybody we send them. On Sunday, he said that the deportees were immediately transferred to the Terrorism Confinement Center, a mega prison opened in 2023 for 20,000 detainees that Bukele said could hold double that capacity. He said that the inmates would perform forced labor for at least a year, possibly more, and that the United States will pay a very low fee for them. Human Rights Watch has, by the way, I did see an extended version of that comment, which was, I guess, designed to take care of the objection. Like if Salvadoran said, why do they pay a low fee? They should make them pay a high fee. Why don't we make money off of this? And I guess the full statement that I've seen elsewhere was that the United States would pay a very low fee for them, meaning that it's a low fee for the United States to pay. But for us, we consider it a high fee. We make lots of money because, I don't know, I guess he's basically saying we're okay with this sort of low-wage situation that we've got going on here. We're a low-wage employee for the United States. Anyway, Human Rights Watch has documented torture, forced disappearances, and a lack of legal recourse in Salvadoran prisons, as well as poor access to food and water. The organization has reported instances in which inmates are systematically beaten and forced to confess that they are members of gangs, according to Juan Papier, America's deputy director for the group. Papier said that El Salvador is offering to become a Central American version of Guantanamo, referring to the U.S. naval base, of course, in Cuba that has held some migrant detainees, and that securing a release from the prison system is extremely hard. I think we made mention before the week closed out yesterday that the Trump administration already abandoning the stupid Guantanamo idea as extraordinarily expensive and dumb. If they are taken to a court hearing, it will be a virtual court hearing with hundreds of detainees at the same time, Papier added. It will be almost impossible for them to be released. There's absolutely no way to communicate with them. And while the Bukele government has invited social media influencers and some journalists to tour the prison, little is known about the conditions for inmates inside, said Carlos Garcia, a journalist and researcher who specializes in the MS-13 gang. Garcia said he was not aware of any inmates who had been released from the prison since then and who have given public interviews about the conditions inside. It was built like a concentration camp, Garcia said. There's no recreational area, no yard outside. The inmates only receive sunlight through small windows. That, of course, will only excite Stephen Miller and Donald Trump even more. And, that's kind of where we stand. I mentioned that there were other stories related to this. There's further information also from the Washington Post, again, under the headline, After Judge Blocks Alien Enemies Act, White House claims nearly 300 already deported. Trump quietly invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 on Friday for the first time since World War II to speed the deportation of alleged gang members. A federal judge stopped them on Sunday, but questions about how effectively that was done. So what can I tell you? They're just ignoring all of this. The Guardian has some articles about this as well, also pointing out that, judge blocked Trump from using the 18th century wartime act for deportations, but to hell with that, they went ahead and did it anyway. So we'll be straightening that out, and I guess, meanwhile, the White House keeps issuing statements like, we didn't defy any judge's orders. They're just, saying we didn't do that. They sometimes bother to explain exactly what they mean. Oh, we did some other thing. It wasn't that we defied it. It's that we pretended we didn't hear it. I don't know if that's significantly different. in their view. I think Philip Bump had made note of that, just pointing out that the Axios reporting on it was particularly galling, I think. Yeah, here it is, Philip Bump. We'll see if I can't squeeze this in before we play our music, or perhaps right over our exit music. It's about that time. Philip Bump saying, to assess the administration's disregard of a court order, Axios spoke to or quoted in their article, this is their big investigation, 2 anonymous White House officials, Charlie Kirk and the White House press secretary. So we spoke to both sides on that, people who support Donald Trump from inside the White House and those who support Donald Trump from outside the White House. Both sides are covered here. Yeah. And somewhere along the line, one of the claims is, I think this is the anonymous White House officials and the White House press secretary saying, no. You got it all wrong. We didn't defy the judge's orders. We just put our fingers in our ears and said, la, 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 well, we can't hear you. That wasn't defiance of the order. Defiance, I guess, implies that we got it, read it, and said we're not going to do it. We're telling you we decided for other reasons not to do what the order said. They arrived late, or no, it didn't arrive late. You can prove that it arrived on time. Well, we just think it was without legal merit. Well, of course, in a real world, if you think something is without legal merit, you have to obey it pending appeal. You can't simply say, well, we think we're going to win the appeal, so we're not going to follow the order, and later on we'll find out if we're right. That's not the way it works, but that's the way the Trump administration does it. All right, we fit in as much as we could about some very complicated and very controversial issues today in 2 hours. There will be more.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Justice Putnam will address it on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. In fact, it's his top story, and then there's more. A dodgy goon is accused here of breaking Treasury privacy rules by circulating a spreadsheet with personal information to other people in the Trump administration. Let's find out what that information was and maybe what they plan to do with it next.